Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the February 1st Facilities Advisory Committee, our first of 2023. I'll call the meeting to order at 7:34 p.m. I'm our chair, Brian Gebhardt. Our first item of business on the agenda is roll call. I will go through the roll call, and please say aye as I get to your name. So Brian Gebhardt, I'm present. Cecily Lee.
Here. I'm here.
Malia, yes, I can hear you. Malia Santos. Are you here, Malia?
Oh.
Yes. I use roll call to also just test everybody's audio at the same time. So thank you, and welcome. Allison McCulley.
Here.
Tom Ekman.
Present.
Mary Vigil.
Present.
Michael Estacio. Present. Divya Villabaconda. Did not see her. Roberta Perry.
Here.
Robert Ho. Not present. Jennifer Parker.
Here.
Jennifer Aochi.
Here.
Benjamin Craig.
Here.
And did I miss anybody? I don't believe so. I will also note we have our trustee representative Diane Jones here as well.
Here.
Do not see Trustee Zhang though. And then last but certainly not least, one of our members, unfortunately for us as a committee, but fortunate to the district, had to resign her position. Sharon Coco has resigned from the FAC because she was just recently appointed to the vacant school board position. So she's continuing to serve the district, and I know she would want. I know she wants to be here as well. And so definitely wanted to publicly thank her as well. Excellent. So I've confirmed we have quorum. Next item on the agenda is adopt the agenda. Is there a motion to adopt our agenda?
Can I make a request? Can we move up the long range facilities item to maybe between 5 and 6? Because we have AE3 coming for that, and I'd like them to be able to present sooner.
After oral communications?
Yes.
Yeah. So is there a motion to adopt the agenda with that modification?
I'll make a motion.
Thank you. Second?
I will second it.
Thank you. All in favor, please raise your virtual hand. You may lower your virtual hand. If you are opposed, please raise your virtual hand. Motion carries. So agenda adopted. We'll move on to introductions. Mr. Hillman to introduce staff.
Great, thank you. Good evening, everybody. There's a couple individuals I wanted to introduce because they've started with the district in one way or another since our last meeting in December. So let me first start with the RGM Kramer staff. I'd like to introduce Rick Kramer, who's here on the call, and he's smiling and waving. And also on his team is DJ Halbert, and Omid Azizi. Collectively, the three of them are representing RGM Kramer as the the program program management firm that we needed to have on board in order to replace the outgoing program management firm, Vanner. As you may recall, we took this item to the Board of Trustees for vote in December, and Rick and his team basically started right after that, worked all the way through the winter break when the district office was closed, and has been both on site at the district office and in virtual meetings like this consistently every day since the board took action. So I wanted to introduce them. From time to time, you may see them here providing updates on things with regard to Measure E, project updates and such. And so I just wanted to give you guys an update that we have them. They have started, and they are starting to tackle some of our big questions and our big concerns around Measure E, and they're doing a great job. So I just wanted to be able to introduce them. And then along with them, I wanted to introduce a new district hire. So this is an FUSD employee. Her name is Priscilla Wong, and she is our bond program manager. This is one of the positions that the district floated back, I think it was last spring, prior to my time with the district, to start to take some of the Measure E work back in-house. While we haven't been able to fill some of the other positions that we posted, we were able to fill this one. Priscilla comes to us from Alameda Unified, where she worked on their Measure program there, their local bond. And so between the combination of Priscilla and the RGM Kramer staff, we are pretty excited about having a new, fresh outlook on where we've been with Measure E and where we're headed with Measure E. So as I mentioned, you'll probably see them around more often because they're going to be the face of Measure E moving forward. You might need to give Priscilla a little bit more time. She's about in day, I think, 6 or 7 right now. So, I'm the old timer with month 4 under my belt. She's still in week 2. So at any rate, wanted to make sure they had a chance to kind of smile and wave, and hopefully they'll be back soon to give some presentation and updates where applicable to the FAC with regard to Measure E. So that's it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and welcome, Richard, Omid, DJ, and Priscilla. Very excited to have you with us on the team.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
We'll move on to our next item on the agenda, approval of minutes. The second and third page of the notice you received has our minutes, and is there a motion to approve our minutes from December 7th, 2022?
Can I ask a quick question?
Please.
I'm sorry, I was absent last time, which is rare for me. And I, in my other committees, it's the practice that people who are not there sort of abstain from minute approval. Is that the norm here as well? Just because we
don't know if we have any. I don't think we have an exact norm here, but feel free to.
I think it's just because we
if you
can't
wish.
verify if they were accurate because we weren't there.
Yeah.
I can motion to approve the minutes. This is Bobby Perry.
I can second.
Thank you, Bobby and Benji. We have a motion and a second. Please raise your virtual hand if you approve the minutes. Please lower your virtual hand. Please raise your hand if you do not approve. Please raise your hand if you abstain. Motion carries. Minutes are adopted. Takes us to our next item on our agenda, oral and written communications. Laura, do we have any written communications?
No, we have none.
For those of you who've joined us virtually from the public, this is the time in our meeting where someone from the public or the committee can speak to an item that's not on the agenda. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak under oral communications? I want to thank you guys from the public for joining, for sure. It's great to have a full virtual room. Laura, or CBOC Meet, is that Laura?
Sorry, this is me, Vinita.
Oh, Vinita. Okay.
No, I like you guys so much. I could not leave you guys alone. So, and I haven't seen your agenda, to be honest, but I would like to say that my question is same as what I asked in CBOC. I would like to know about the facility situation for Mission High School, roofing situation that was brought up to the board last year. So I am aware there are many schools who have roofing issues, but Mission students mentioned that they are literally putting buckets in their classrooms to capture the water. So that was my question. Thank you.
Before moving to the next speaker, I'll just note that we do have roofing captured as a future meeting topic. Arun.
Thank you for inviting me to this meeting. So I went through the demographics report, but one question I had is, so we know like Alameda is only reducing by 3% overall, but the enrollment, but FUSD is reducing by 7%. So I don't know if there is any particular reason for that. That was one. And the second question was, so when someone does not leaves the school district, do we do a survey to find out the reason behind why they are leaving the school district, or we just because right now I don't think there's any survey or any reason which is asked for them. And one more thing I had is, do we know exactly what is the Fremont, just around Fremont, we have like Basis, Challenger, and Stratford. What is the private school enrollment? Are they also seeing the same, or are they seeing an increase?
Thank you. I made a few notes. I think that those are things we can address when we get to the demographic study item on our agenda.
Okay, great. That's right. Thanks.
And thank you for the input. We will move on to the long-range facilities plan update.
Okay, sorry, I had to get to the mute button there. I wanted to introduce Doug Davis. For those of you that were at the our meeting that we had in person, you got a chance to meet Doug, and he gave us a quick update on where things were at that point. And I wanted to reintroduce him tonight. He has a similar slide deck update that he wants to present. And Doug, you should be able to share the screen. I don't know if you're familiar with Google Meet or not, but it's the up arrow about 2 over from the red hang up button. And you're still on mute. All right, he found it.
Is anybody hearing audio right now? Okay, Doug, if you're talking, we can't hear you.
Okay, I accidentally clicked the mute button. Okay, my apologies. I was asking Danny if you want me to basically present.
If you want, I can present. You can just tell me go to the next slide if that's easier for you.
No, I got it. I think okay, you guys should be able to see that. So let me do this here real quick. Hopefully you'll be able to see the first slide.
Yes, we see it.
Okay, perfect.
Go for it. It's all yours.
Let me know when you want me to get started. Okay. Well, Happy New Year, everybody. It's good to seeing a lot of familiar faces here. So I just wanted to kind of give you an update of where we stand. The good news I can offer is pretty much we're at the conclusion of the data collection process. We have about 3 sites that need to give us 3 more surveys that Daniel and I are working. Everybody else has contributed information. We've had a chance to kind of go through and review a lot of the information, put together a preliminary needs analysis. We are working to complete validation interviews where we basically review the results with the sites on a one-on-one basis to kind of make sure we fully understand everything. We're about a third of the way through with that, but as we started to present at the end of the year, we do have a preliminary analysis, and we're at the point, we also basically received a demographic analysis, and we're starting to reconcile our data against that. But we're at the point that we really need to start working with the FACP subcommittee, primarily really do 2 things. One is we have the needs. It's kind of a glorified, shall we say, ask list basically from all the sites. Now I need to work with everybody to kind of go through and prioritize, what are the items that are going to basically be most important in terms of basically addressing in terms of the next bond measure, what items are a lower priority. And I think that's kind of more of a work session. I'll kind of describe more of the process of that. And I think as we kind of go through and develop essentially information on basically each site, we assume that we want to basically start socializing that with a larger group of stakeholders. We want to work with you guys to develop that process that makes sense for the district. We assume we want to be fair and equitable and basically make sure everybody has a chance to have their voices being heard. So we want to kind of work with the subcommittee. So I think our bottom line ask is, we know the subcommittee has been formed. I think we want to start working with Danny and with the subcommittee directly. Probably a series of working sessions in order to basically kind of hash this out. And I think once we basically understand what the priorities are, it would allow us to kind of put together some scenarios of basically what are the necessary projects based against that set of priorities. And that'll allow us to kind of go through and put together an initial draft that reflects those priorities and begin us to basically fill out what this next round of bond funding will need to be. Any questions on that before I kind of jump into the next portion of it?
We have,
Hey, Doug,
Tom.
you said that there's 3 sites that still need the survey completed. Do you is that the M&O part of the survey, or is that something else?
1 is an M&O. 2 is basically the education programs. I just suspect that we just have 2 very busy site leads that just need to get around to it. I think we've solved the remaining technical issues with a couple sites. That's why we're down to those 3. These 2, I don't think we've engaged at all. So, I think once we kind of get that information, we'll be able to generate a preliminary site survey and be able to complete our data set.
Okay, if you want to reach out, and I can definitely help with the M&O portion of the 1 site.
Okay, we definitely appreciate that. Cool.
Diane Jones.
Yes, I was wondering if the information from the sites, has it all been survey related so far, or has your team been out to interview folks at the sites on site at every site yet?
So there's 3 parts, but there's the survey portion, which is complete online. There's the actual site visit, which we completed about pretty much, I think 42, 43 of the site surveys are completed. We haven't done the ones in the last 3. And the validation interviews is when we have a chance to basically go through and review with everybody what we've put in there. We've had 15 sites complete the validation interview process. I think we want to talk a little bit more about how we can kind of get more engagement. We do have the online system, but the other thought is, frankly, I think we just want to show up to a couple locations in the district and give people an opportunity on a certain day to come to talk to us directly, so we can complete that process for as many sites as possible.
And so has that been would that have involved community members coming to the sites, engaging with parents? Was it advertised, hey, we're going to be at the sites, please come if you have anything that you'd like us to know about the facilities here?
So not yet. So
Okay.
what we did do is, when we basically conformed each of the site teams, we asked each site to put together an education program leads that was typically a principal and a lead educator. We had an M&O team put together, typically somebody from Tom Eckman's team and basically the site janitorial. And we did ask them basically put together a community lead, either somebody from the PTA or somebody that was not a district employee, to contribute to information. This creates an initial list of items that we want to go out and basically validate with larger group, whether basically other teachers on site in larger community. And I think when you basically look at that bullet point at the bottom of like formalize a fair and equitable process to view the site profiles with large stakeholder groups, now that we have information to share, now that we have something to say, hey, this is the initial list of issues, is this right? That's the part we definitely want to start getting out to a larger group and basically have those meetings to get their input on it. Does that answer the question, or is there anything else?
Please continue with your presentation.
Yep, no worries. So we have a chance to, again, go through and take a look at the demographic data, and this is it being loaded into our model. So we're looking kind of more just in terms of the maximum range of that model, which is about 6 years out. And we've noticed basically from the figures that the district enrollment is projected to decrease roughly about 10% from where it stands about now. And looking at the numbers, it looks like it will first hit primarily the elementary school sites, which is the blue line at the top of the middle graph. It looks like for now, the middle schools and high school sites will be stable for a little bit. I assume later on that a decreasing trajectory will also hit them as well. We did also take a quick look based upon that data in terms of classroom utilization. That's literally like the number of folks projected for each site divided by the number of classrooms. And that's a very, very rough metric. It doesn't really consider, specialized classrooms or the unique nature of spaces on each one. But for middle schools, it looks like we're roughly about 30 per classroom. High schools is going to go from about 26 to 23. Elementary schools, basically, it's going to decrease from 20 to 17. So again, very rough initial measure on top of it, but it just suggests that we might have some latitude for exploring essentially underutilized capacity basically there. The graph at the bottom shows just from the rough data that we've gotten in terms of uploading what was in the demographic report, how each site will be changing over the next 6 years based upon that report. Why it's changing, I don't have those answers. We're just basically reflecting how much it's going to change. The only things that really seem to be changing is obviously the junior high schools that added a grade level will basically be adding basically more population that seems to be consistent essentially over time. And the new elementary school, Lilla Bringers Elementary, over time will basically, because this new site will also be accruing more population. So we're going to be comparing these figures and these statistics, against needs that are coming up for the study. So obviously, if somebody's saying like, hey, we need a larger MUR, or basically, need to think about cafeteria capacity, we're going to be reconciling that with, is there an actual population increase or decrease that's going to be driving that on their campus? Any questions on that before I move on to the next slide?
I do have one question. I wanted to make sure I understood the classroom utilization you just described.
Yep.
It's just as simple as the site head count divided by the number of classrooms at that
It's
site?
that simple. It's very rough, but it's basically that simple. And just kind of gets a sense of just like, are we kind of in the ballpark in terms of our target figures, or are we basically saying overcrowding or basically underutilization of space? So just, again, this is a very initial draft, and it does not look at peculiarities that basically might be at each campus, but it does seem to indicate that we basically just might have a little slack in 6 years at elementary school sites.
Mr. Hillman. Oh, I can't hear you.
Sorry, I lowered the hand
Oh.
and forgot to unmute. And just to confirm, Doug, that all of the information that's in this slide is really coming from the demographer's report that was presented in the fall, right?
It is coming from the demographer's report that was just sent to us last week. So we literally parsed the data. We basically put it into our models because we're basically kind of reflecting that. But, if you look at the data as it's coming out of the report, this is what it seems to be telling us.
Perfect. And I wanted to highlight that because what the RGM Kramer team and I and Priscilla have found in the last few weeks is that some of the information that was in the demographer's report probably needs to be updated as well, because there's a couple of loading factors and a couple of classroom counts that we think might be slightly off. So point is, the overall trends are still accurate. That's really the takeaway from this slide. And I think it shows it very perfectly. The visual is perfect of which direction we're going. I would not, as a committee member, get too hung up on the actual numbers. They're probably going to fluctuate a little bit. So just a word of caution.
Cool.
Allison.
Yeah, sorry, just a related question. Obviously, you do the best you can to kind of estimate these things, but for example, at my site, we have a lot of overcrowding at the 11th grade level this year. We had a lot of classes at the beginning of the year that were at 40 students ish, 41, 42, and we were working on that as a union because it's above the level that can fit in our classrooms and it's above contractual level. And so I just, if you take the number of students and divide it by classrooms, obviously it's very rough, right?
It's a very rough measure.
Yeah.
We'll
And
be
so
looking at it on a site by site basis. And obviously, if you basically had one site that's averaging higher and one site that's averaging lower and basically lump them all together, you won't see that. So that's why I'm being very cautious, saying like, hey, very rough, high level analysis. And, I think when it comes to the middle schools and high schools, I think there's less of an issue there. But I think it just means there's kind of more of a question to explore there with elementary school sites. So that's kind of what that means to me. It's just like, let's look at utilization better on the elementary school sites based upon the population projection in 6 years.
okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you. Please continue.
Not a problem. So looking at our complete data set, and we'll basically be compiling or sending this presentation out. I think you guys already have a copy of this presentation. This is kind of like the average scores as ranked basically by a number of factors, essentially by the education programs team and the community for a lot of sites. So as right now, education program we're fairly complete on that. We're still waiting for a few community surveys to come in, but we can actually get started on the data set with the education program portion of it. If you look at the numbers though, in terms of the average, I think it's like 2.71 is how education programs coming in, 2.62 for community, which means everybody's thinking roughly about the same thing, which is what you're seeing on this graph, that most sites people think, yeah, fair, only about 30% of the sites basically are going in, shall we say, in a good direction, or just good overall assessment. Poor is basically about 8%, and you can kind of see the site staff and community overall evaluation, so they're not incredibly disparate. This, in terms of education program, focuses more on how the school is being used. When it comes to the M&O slide, which we're presenting, this is more of just basically the condition of the facility and plant. I think the good news that I can offer here is half your facilities from the M&O team seem to be roughly about fair condition. There are some issues though. 41% of them basically seem to be good condition, so your physical plant seems to be okay. There are definitely a lot of deferred maintenance issues, which I'll get to on the next slide. And what we did in compiling all this data is we are now tracking 443 specific needs and improvements. You could call them potential projects, you can call them basically things that need to be addressed. But across all campuses we have right now, we have 443 specific needs improvements. And the way we kind of break it down is 91 are what we call program improvements. And again, this is just an initial list that needs to be vetted by a priority matrix that we got to develop with the FAC. This is just kind of what everybody is asking for. And in sitting these interviews, I don't think anybody's really shooting for the moon on this thing. Everybody's asking for a lot of things that, in many cases have been addressed in quite some time. In breaking it down, there's about 91 program improvements, basically meaning that people are looking to expand something to handle a larger program. There's 31 facility improvements. We define those as not so much basically a program as basically driving a change. It's a part of the building needs to be renovated, and these are primarily bathroom renovations. There's 85 site projects, and these are permanent changes to repairs of grounds, everything from fields to landscaping to a lot of asphalt. 76 MEP projects, just HVAC, electrical and plumbing that's not working out. There's 25 roof projects, which we'll get to a little bit more detail on. 50 deferred maintenance projects, 26 tech projects, and 2 comprehensive ADA improvements. If you look at this list, from our standpoint, it looks like about 238 of these items, or about 54% of what we call non-discretionary items. These are basically just repair that need to just occur. I would say that we could probably have a little bit more in terms of, we could probably call some of the tech projects basically discretionary, but when it comes to basically pedagogical needs, some of these basically might be more necessary than not. But we're seeing, just in terms of kind of like dividing it down, there's about a third of these projects are things that were identified and were left over, basically from the previous master plan update, things that were just not fully done. And in terms of desired completion, this is just what the site's requesting. Again, it's up to the district and the committee to kind of go through and prioritize these things. There's a lot of things that basically people like to get done with the next. Actually, I think that's reversed out. I think basically 2/3 of them are things that people like to see done with about the next year. About a third of them are things that can wait for a couple, 3 years. And then there's about 6% that people are willing to wait for about 3 to 5 years on. So I know I presented a lot of data there, so I will stop there for a moment and take any questions of that.
Diane Jones.
Yeah, I'm a little bit. I'm wondering how this is going to work, because I may have asked a similar question at the last meeting. When we look at something that people want within a year,
Yep.
Or think that needs to be done within a year, we won't have a new bond by then.
Of course.
So how is it that things are being put in a category of less than a year? How are we gonna? And maybe, Mr. Hillman, maybe this is something. Are we going to be able to address those things that have been identified that way in less than a year?
Let me throw this out there. This is not so much things you can do within a year. We're just asking the end users, like, okay, they're talking about this issue. How quickly would you like to get it done? Would you guys like to see it done within about a year? Would you guys like to see it done within the next 2 to 3 years? Would you guys like to see it done in the next, 3 to 5 years? Is what we're asking. And we're just trying to gauge a sense basically of what the site priority is going to, what the site is looking for. It's up to you to determine whether or not you can deliver it or if it's worthwhile to deliver it within that time. But we do want to kind of get some measure of just, how much that site desires it. And I think the analogy I gave last time around is, hey, this is like a landlord talking to a tenant and asking us, like, what can we do to improve your apartment? It could be along the lines of like, okay, the stove's not working. The windows are leaking. I want new carpet. Well, it's up to you guys to determine that, okay, well, the windows are more important. The stove we'll probably get to next year. Carpet seems to be fine. We're not going to do anything with that. And it's up to you guys at the time frame, but at least you have a sense of basically what that site is requesting initially. And you can use that to kind of gauge your decisions. I don't know, clarify the question, or is any follow-up to that?
Thank you. Any other questions on this slide? Robert Ho.
Maybe to follow up on Diane's question, I mean, since you guys are speaking to the public, I think it's giving a bad impression if we're talking about 1 year versus 2 years, and it really comes out to 3 to 5 years. So maybe you can say high priority, medium priority, low priority. I mean, I don't know, but to say, hey, if we go out to a large community meeting with 300 people there and we tell them we're talking about whether we're going to fix it in 1 year, 2 years, that's just really unrealistic.
I think the question is, we're not promising how quickly we're going to deliver it per se. I think we're asking them from their standpoint, how quickly would they like to see it fixed.
Yeah, but
and what we're trying to do is we're trying to quantify it. Instead of basically telling people they want a high, medium, low priority, we're trying to get them to think in time frames in order to kind of distinguish what those priorities are going to be.
I share the concern. I think when this survey are they given parameters, or is it open-ended? How soon would you like to see this? And they put in these parameters, or are they given, how soon would you like to see this? And there are choices, less than a year, 2 to 3 years, 3 to 5 years, because if you're given a choice like that, that does set expectations that then we hear about if we don't deliver. If we're asking the question, that assumes that it puts in people's minds that we can deliver in that time frame.
Okay. I think it was set up as a letter. We basically just asked the question, basically, how soon would you like to see this? I think there's some implication that once this process is underway, but it's just, we basically give them a choice of those 3 choices in essence, in order to kind of gauge it out.
I mean, obviously you're in the bond business too. Honestly, we're talking 2 to 10 years, right? Some bond projects are not done yet from their last bond.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, you won't get a bond passed for about 2 years, but within the next 5-year program, that's basically what we're
right.
thinking.
So we should be saying a lot of these changes won't, the first changes might happen in 3 to 5 years. if we're lucky.
Then I think basically in terms of our future communication on this, we can change it out. The data at this point is, you know, it's collected essentially within this format in order to kind of gauge it, but in terms of how we frame it, certainly we can kind of go through and set those expectations. You know, I think when we talked to the sites, what we kind of told them is not that all this stuff was going to happen. It was just kind of more along the lines of basically from your perspective, what would you like to see? I don't think there's any guarantees basically that, you know, the district or we were basically making from anybody. You know, it's just more along the lines of like, you know, from your standpoint, what would you like to basically see for your campus?
And I think as we discussed in our previous meeting, this next step of taking this information and figuring out, you know, how to evaluate it, how to communicate it, is a critical piece, right? And
Correct.
as Doug shared in the very beginning, that's kind of one of the next steps we're going to be taking, working with staff to put that together. But I think it is important. This is all self-reported data from the sites, right? With
Correct.
relatively little guidance because, you know, facilities are a really complex thing. We can't train, you know, everybody involved in the survey process, all little details about facilities, but it does give us a broad set of input from the sites to consider, and we'll have to be, as we discussed in our previous meeting, we'll have to be very careful about how we represent this information and to the community and how we look at this information. And I'm actually excited to get to that step.
I mean, the big thing is we have to collect the data. We have to kind of get a sense of just what the needs are as basically perceived essentially by the site, because that gives you the data to kind of sort through to figure out, okay, here's what people are talking about. Here's what people are requesting. You know, how do we prioritize it? You know, how do we tell them these are the things we're going to do, these things that we're not going to do. But we have to start somewhere in terms of collecting that data. And obviously, you know, we have 450 plus points basically for the whole district now.
Allison.
Yeah, sorry. I just I agree that either, you know, high, medium, low priority could be asked or a number of years could be asked. But I just noticed sort of in this information that's presented that things like bathrooms and roofing is included. And I just sort of wanted to remind people that, I mean, like at my school, we have a whole building that hasn't had bathrooms for like a month. There's sewage flowing in the hallways. There's, you know, buckets, as somebody mentioned earlier, being, you know, put under leaks. So I'm amazed that anyone's putting 3 to 5 years. Like, I think they're being kind of generous. And so it's, I don't know, when people say less than a year, like they really mean
Well,
it.
I'm going to be honest with you. There's a mistake on this graphic. The 3 to 5 years should be switched with less than 1 year.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
So-
no, I get it. I'm
Yeah,
just
just wanna
saying,
clarify.
like, there are some serious needs, and I'm impressed that people are saying that they can wait longer.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. It's just in talking with these sites, I'm going to say, and just for my personal, just kind of review and assessment of it, 2/3, 3/4 of it are just basically basic, essential, prosaic, deferred maintenance projects or just basic needs. I don't think there's a lot of people who are basically we're shooting for the moon on that. you
Yeah,
know?
we have a condemned building at my school that got crashed into by a car, and it has a sign that says condemned, and we don't know when it's going to be fixed. These are fairly basic needs.
Yeah, you know, so I think those are the type of things we're kind of seeing, you know, essentially across the district here. I can start going to some of the detail in terms of what we're seeing in these categories if you want.
So I think I do want to make sure we keep moving because we have the demographic report, which is a large item as well. Diane Jones, though, what you have something? You're on mute.
I'm sorry. I'm just also, I'm looking at the list on a previous slide of the best performers, and I don't want to get into details, but there's at least one of those sites that I've been to that has some really significant problems. And seeing that on the best performers is concerning. So, I mean, that's why I'm asking if people have been out and actually taken a look at these sites, because if this is based on survey data, I'm really concerned with what I'm seeing, given what I know about.
Which site specifically are you looking at?
It's this. I would prefer not to necessarily identify, but
So, ma'am, I can assure you, we have gone through and we looked at all the sites and tell you right now, it's all relative because nothing is perfect based on this district. All these sites have issues. This is all fairly relative to one another. So, and to other people's points on this thing, a couple sites might have, some leaking roofs and other issues, but there's other buildings that basically have literally fungus growing in portables, condemned buildings and HVAC systems that haven't worked in years. So that's relative scale that we're kind of going through. And all sites probably have generated anywhere from about 10 to 20 distinct and specific needs across all of them. So I think if you kind of go through and look at the report in detail, I think you'll see a lot of that stuff basically kind of captured in what we're doing here. Like I said, there's nothing here that really basically comes across as, your average grade across all our facilities is about a C-.
So let's keep moving because I know we wanted to talk about next steps.
Okay,
Because there's a lot of important work.
So in terms of I'm just going to go relatively quickly through these next few slides, but in terms of basically programmatic projects, most of what we're seeing is a lot of the middle schools, even though they kind of got some expanded classrooms and greater capacity, it's in many cases the multi-purpose room, the gym and the library didn't kind of fully catch up yet, basically with the changes on site. We're seeing a lot of items driven by just simply obsolete facilities and infrastructure. And we're seeing a couple of sites that basically require two significant ADA improvements campus-wide. If you look at basically the MVP project types, it pretty much hit every campus. It was evenly spread basically across just mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems in terms of just deferred maintenance. A lot of sites basically were looking for security improvements. There's just 23 sites that either need new fencing or basically significant repairs of fencing. 12 sites are looking for better lighting. 8 sites basically looking for security camera projects. There's a lot of basically just other maintenance projects in terms of just exterior maintenance, in terms of building envelope and trim that basically is just decaying, or windows that are falling apart. 18 sites are basically need significant interior finishes, and there's 8 sites that have portable repair replacements just outright. And a lot of sites basically are looking for repaving. So there is 35 playing field and AC repaving projects. There's 13 sites that are looking for shade structure, and 13 sites are looking for modification to the entry. So kind of a full gamut. And again, I'd say 2/3 of these things are kind of more non-discretionary projects that basically need to be done. So our next step is, now that we've collected this data, we would like to go through and share this data with you and figure out, well, how do we prioritize and how it basically makes sense. So we've gone through and done the data collection. We're basically in the process of wrapping up the validation. We certainly are seeing common themes and urgent priorities, which are basically there. But what we need you guys to do, what we need your input on, is just as it's written right here, provide guidance to us on which standards basically to apply. In other words, which projects are the most important for you to solve? Can we basically kind of put together a ranking on these things? So projects of a certain category, a certain type, can basically be scored higher, and projects which are lesser priority can be scored lower. We'd like to work directly with the committee on that to kind of figure out, okay, based on a uniform criteria, how these projects scale and rank, and basically, which ones basically rise to the top, which ones basically kind of go through and sink to the bottom. We imagine this is going to be a kind of a relatively iterative process, but the idea is ultimately we'll get to a list that will basically go through and present to not only the committee and the board, but the leadership, and basically to finalize. And what that allows us to do is finalize basically on a set of what is the set priority and projects based for the next bond measure. But another way to really say it very simply is, we have collected a lot of data and we have a good understanding of just what we're seeing going across this campus. How do you want to sort through it, and how do you want to prioritize it to kind of figure out which ones, are come first and which items basically may be of less importance to you. So I'll stop there and take some questions on the slide. I'm sure there's got to be some questions on the slide.
Jennifer Iucci. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. So do we have estimated costs for these projects, and do we have length of time these projects would take, as well as do we know what the budget would be?
We have a very rough idea of basically what the projects are going to be. I think, if you kind of look at other, similar processes, I think before we start, putting the energy and developing, fairly detailed cost estimates for each one, I think it's good to understand basically what the priorities are. And then once we kind of figure out which ones are higher priority, starting to dial down a little bit closer on the cost of these things. There is a very high rough order of magnitude data that we basically put together. Right now, if we had to go through and add up everything that was in that's on this wish list, we did everything that was basically being requested. We're probably in about the 1.3 billion range, plus or minus 20%. Now, looking at your last bond measure, my understanding is you guys, when you first had your wish list, it was about 1.1 billion, and eventually you sorted it down to the $650 million bond measure you went to the public with. And that's the next process that we got to go with. We basically put together this fairly comprehensive wish list. We need to kind of go through and figure out how to sort through it. There's a lot of things we need to kind of go through and validate. And once we have that list, that will allow us to kind of go through and finalize, what that set of projects is going to be for your next bond measure.
Diane Jones.
I think, I'm speaking for me, not the board in general, but I think health and safety concerns are obviously the top priority. So if we have sewage in places and leaking roofs, those rise to the top. HVAC issues are a health issue now, we know.
Yep.
I'm concerned. I'm hoping that we can take into consideration declining enrollment, because there may be sites right now where we're hearing we need a bigger MUR. But in 5 years, they won't need a bigger MUR because of declining enrollment. So there's got to be a way to factor out, that may be a top priority today.
Right.
But we need a way to factor those things into consideration.
That is what we're going to work on now, because we just got the demographic data relatively recently, and we're going to compare all those requests that we want to bigger this, we want to bigger that against, okay, well, enrollment's going down significantly, so this is really applying. Because I think there's a lot of things we need to kind of put a checkbox like that. And I absolutely agree with you. There are some just, in my mind, pretty patent health and safety issues. You have a number of broken sewers across this district. I would imagine that's got to be, number one priority. I believe a third of the roofs basically require replacement now. Like there are leaks across these things now. I got to imagine that's going to rise to the top. I think there's some programmatic things that can go to the bottom. I think some cherry finishes can go to the bottom. But that's exactly what we got to get your input on. We have an inventory of what people want. We have an inventory of the things that we've seen. It's just like, how do we work? And basically input you just gave us right now is like, hey, we want to put health and safety up top. We want to basically put roofing maybe the next year. Those are the things we want to work with you to kind of put together a matrix, because what we can do is score all these things and then figure out, what's going to make sense for the next bond measure. But you're the clients, you're the end users, you're the ones who use the facilities on a day-to-day basis. What's important to you guys, as a district. And that's what we need to work with your subcommittee on in order to basically figure out so we can appropriately rank these projects, prioritize.
So let's talk to that, kind of those next steps, I guess. And one of my first questions would be around schedule or desired schedule and timeline for the process, because that'll affect, how often that'll affect planning for our meetings as a PAC, and how often the subcommittee needs to meet as well.
I think we'd like to basically kind of work with you guys on maybe a bi-weekly and perhaps even a weekly basis in order to kind of hammer this out in a series of, I'm going to say, about 4 work sessions. And it'd be good if we can basically kind of get that accomplished, I would say, over the next couple months.
Meeting the box provide guidance to FMP team on which standards to supplement. I'm not sure exactly what that means.
Yep, I think basically to me it's just identify the principles down here, and rank the principles, in terms of just like, what is a priority to you guys? What is the most important things to kind of go through and solve? I mean, I know this is kind of a nice little graphic, but basically it's just what is important to you. I think there's information we need to get. How do we create a criteria that we can kind of go through and rank all these projects on? You know, if we sort all these projects out, what does that list look like? You know, is everybody okay with that list? You know, I think that's basically the next steps to kind of sort out what's going to be the important part of this plan.
Okay.
One thing I would like to add just briefly is that the first box of the review of district standards is an important piece. And the reason for that is we need to make sure that how the district as an organization thinks a school should look when we're done with it needs to be reviewed. We may not need to change very much to it, but it's been a few years since we've looked at that. And so what does an elementary classroom look like? What does a middle school science classroom look like, et cetera? Those are there. It's not the exact layout. It's not there will be a door on the northwest corner. It's not that specific, but we might have a list of features that we want to see in those types of rooms, representative. And we want to review those with the subcommittee to make sure that they're up to date with where the district is now, because a lot's changed since the last master plan was really adopted. And then there's also technical specifications too that we would like to get the input of the committee on. And that it's going to get into the weeds a little bit around what do our exterior downspouts look like? Do we put a downspout in the wall because that's what the architect likes to do because it looks pretty? Or do we want an exterior with a clean out at the bottom because it's easier on maintenance? Both of those types of things need to be reviewed because that will help with the prioritization when you go to put weighted or unweighted or numbers or however it is that we decide to do it. Going through those specs, ed specs and the technical specs will help the subcommittee.
Allison.
Thanks. This is a question, and it might be an ignorant one. I am a transfer here for the first year from TAC, the Technology Advisory Committee, and we had a network upgrade a few years back where they, upgraded our internet and a lot of our network. And part of the problem was that they were installing a lot of network drops around our rooms in all of our campuses, but no new electricity. And we were always told, that's not part of the scope of the project. So we have a lot of unused network drops that where you cannot put computers in the room because there are no plugs anywhere near yards of the place where the network drop is. And so I just don't know how this committee interacts with technology, if at all, and how obviously electrical plugs in a room is way less important than mold and leaks in the roof and bathrooms. But it's, do we talk about that when we talk about technology? Like right now I have computers I literally can't plug in, and I have everything else that I need except no power. So, and it's the same all over the district. So I was just curious.
Yeah, the technical specifications that I'm speaking about are not technology specifications. They're technical for all the trades. So there will be a plumbing set, a mechanical set, an information technology set. And so our IT department right now, our CTO, Melvin Easley, is putting together an updated version of IT specs that will be incorporated into the technical specifications for buildings, period. So again, what do we want it to look like? What kind of features do we want them to have when we walk away from a building, whether that's a modernization or a new building? And then that becomes part of this calculus that Doug is describing.
So that is part of this process, right? Because last time I was, I have 58 computers in my room, which is appropriate for a high school library in 2023, but I have 5 computer outlets and I keep being told that's not part of the network upgrade. So, so that is part of this facilities discussion, right? Is electricity.
Yeah, and honestly, we've had 35 sites report what we call tech issues of various kinds. Everything from inadequate internet to the problems you're basically describing to old infrastructure basically in place. The other part of it, which is not on this list that we also want to do, is we'd like to, once we assemble these initial project profiles, and there tend to be drafts or site profiles, we would like the process of basically how to socialize it out to, again, to larger stakeholder groups in the community at large, so they can weigh in on it and basically add their 2 cents to it. So, if there's something which is missed, or if somebody has feelings that, hey, maybe the site is not doing as well because of XYZ reasons, let's capture those reasons. Let's make sure we put them in the inventory so we can basically get all these needs its fair shake. The reason why we started the survey process, it gives us an initial core list of items, and it just gives us an initial profile for each site. that can be marked up and adjusted and basically added on to over time, but at least as a nucleus of data to start with. The whole intent is basically to have a process which people can weigh in and add to it, and then have a ranking process, which is described right here, to prioritize it, because that's how we get a final list of the projects, and that's how we make sure we get buy-in from everybody to make sure that everybody's happy with the list. That ultimately becomes the final bond measure.
So I want to. I have both a comment that I think builds on other comments we've heard. I think that I think would be good to add to this process is kind of what is the community engagement plan for this process, right? Are there boxes along the way where we're seeking
We want your
community
help
input?
community to figure that part out. We absolutely need to have community input and larger stakeholder group input on it.
So that's one of the subcommittees to-do list. Fair enough.
Exactly.
And
I'm sure you don't want us. Go ahead. Sorry.
And then, and I completely agree. That's a great thing for the subcommittee to work on and bring back to the full committee. And then I think demographics is a pretty nuanced topic in and of itself, and that there's some part of the process should be about, what does the declining enrollment mean to our facilities plan, right? In 2014, we were in growing enrollment, and what that meant to the facilities plan was what ended up being the middle school conversions. So similarly, there's a piece to that there that I would expect the subcommittee to be working with staff on as well. So and if you're saying 2 months, is that 2 months to get to the prioritized list?
I think it's 2 months to basically kind of put together a prioritization system that we can then apply to these 450 needs, and then we can basically sort out, what needs rise to the top and what needs rise to the bottom. And then, of course, once we have that, it basically kind of directly forms what's going to wind up in the final master plan update.
Okay. And then from my notes, and I'm just putting this out here just to confirm the decision we made last time, I have Tom, Divya, Cecily, Michael, Benji, and myself, Brian, on the subcommittee. Originally, Sharon was also on the subcommittee, but as she's on the board now, she will join in the decision making later. But I have those 6 people, so we need to. It's probably smartest to work offline to identify when we can begin meeting. But it sounds like
we can do a
sooner the
lot
better.
of sessions, but if we can basically just kind of find a good time for us to kind of really start doing a deep dive, I'm saying maybe just a standing 60-90 minute hour time that we can establish during the course of the week. We can meet with you guys and just have these discussions. I think we kind of sort out what's going to be important part of these things.
Okay. Could I ask someone from staff to kind of help organize polling that group and getting us going?
Yes, of course, we can do that.
Excellent. All right. Now, this was fantastic information, and excited to move on to the next step.
Cool.
With the subcommittee, and with a goal for, one of our goals should be to be able to be bringing back a progress update date in March to the FAC.
Yeah, we look forward to working with the subcommittee. I think once we kind of get into it, a lot of these things will sort themselves out, but we have completed the survey. We've collected a lot of data, and we'd like to basically kind of, continue to validate with everybody, but now is the time to kind of bring with you guys to kind of figure out what does it all mean, what are the important priorities, and how does it shape a final master plan?
Thank you, Doug. All right, we'll go ahead and move on to our next item then.
Thank you. Reach out to Danny if you have any further questions, and I look forward to working with you guys to evolve the next step.
Let's do.
Thanks, everyone.
So our next item is update on meeting protocols. And I was going to ask if Laura could lead this item.
Sure. So we've been meeting virtually under AB 361 flexibilities. The board every month reapproves or reconfirms the need to meet virtually. That's because the state's allowing that. But that is expiring on February 28th, which means that committees that are subject to the Brown Act, which includes the FAC, will have to move to in-person meetings. So our next meeting is March 1st, and that will be our first, actually we met in person in December, but that'll be our first mandatory return to in-person meetings. So I can turn that back over to you, Brian, about the conversation that happened in the CBOC, but that's the reasoning why we're going to move back to in-person.
Thank you, Laura. And you know, I think as we learned in December, it'll take us some practice to get back good at meeting in person, much like we've had a lot of practice meeting virtually these past few years. And then for March 1st, we are working to coordinate with staff in the CBOC to meet at one of the middle schools. You know, perhaps Centerville. So it'll give us an opportunity, like we did in December, to see some of the new facilities that are coming online, and then continue our work. Are there any questions or comments? Allison.
This is probably a dumb one, but it seems like the purpose of the, like, you can't meet virtually thing is that the public is supposed to be able to come. Or are we posting where we're going to be if we're moving around and they're allowed to come?
Yes, that's included in the agenda, and the public is encouraged to come.
Cool. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. We'll go ahead and move on to item 7, the annual demographic study.
Did you want me to take the lead on that one?
Yes, that would be fantastic.
Okay. So good evening, everyone. The link there gets you back to the board agenda, where our demographer, who was unavailable tonight, but gave a presentation to the Board of Education. And I can go ahead and I'm not going to give the same presentation, but I will be happy to show the slide deck just so that we can talk about it and see if you guys have any questions or anything like that. Can you guys see it okay?
Yes, I can see it. And I think just encourage everybody to think of this as some foundational information that's going to support our master's facilities planning work, which is why this is a pretty critical topic, or one of the many reasons it's a critical topic.
So this is the slide deck that was provided. It's a PowerPoint presentation. The agenda item, if you link to it, actually has the demographer's report split into 2 files because it's such a large file. We had to split it up. But basically, this is the summary. So this is basically enrollment projection results versus actual. The reality for Fremont Unified was that our TK and our kinder enrollments came in lower than anticipated, but first grade was a little bit more than expected. So you can see the differential there of 76 students lower in TK, 120 lower in K, and about 128 more in first grade. Most of the other grade levels, as you scan down this, were a decline, however. So the decline was 417 students more than the 213 projected. So that total decline was just below 2% as compared to the 21-22 school year. This is a great visual representation, I think, of where we've been as a district up to basically 22-23. This is our current school year. And you can see going all the way back to 13-14 when the last master plan was approved and adopted. You can see we've had a little bit of growth, and then we're basically back to where we were, a little lower actually than 13-14. And then these 5-6 years ahead, you can see that the projection is downward. This future projection assumes that our transitional kindergarten counts expand based upon the state rollout. It also includes our special education students. They're in there with their grade level counts. And we're from this projection from the demographer, they are predicting a decline of just over 500 students for the 23-24 school year. This slide gets into birth rates in kinder. It's a little bit more detail. It's a diving into that particular grade level. But overall, this is a statewide issue about the number of births declining. The birth rate in the state of California has been declining for many, many years. This is a multi-decades issue. This is not something that's just because of the pandemic. I think they may see the data come out of the pandemic that births dropped off a little bit more, but this isn't a new phenomenon. The capture rate was down the past 2 years. So the capture rate is really the students that start with us and they stay with us. So that's been down, meaning we've had students who started with us and are not continuing as they level up through the grades. And that can be seen here with the kindergarten data. Incoming K classes are projected to be relatively stable. However, we're expecting to keep those kinder students as they progress through the years. And then the little red stacked bar there in the K projection in the out years, you can see is also included. Birth rate trends as it relates to TK enrollment is here. It's a good reminder that transitional kindergarten becomes a full grade level in 25-26, and we estimate that's about 1,500 students. Current enrollment by grade. So this is where you can see that capture rate. We have a pretty small kinder class this year. That's the far left side of the graph. And this original K class stacked graph was, if you were to take, let's say 8th grade, for instance, the 8th grade class there, when they were in kindergarten, we had 2,499 students. Our current 8th grade class is just below that by 50, 60. So this is that capture rate piece that you can see with the line graph stacked or overlaid, I should is a better word for the bar graph. So as 12th grade, you can see we had a kinder class that was smaller, and we've gained maybe close to 100 students. So it's just a good thing to keep track of. There's something about this middle grades, 4, 5, 6, not middle school grades, just the middle of the graph, where the capture rate wasn't as high. So these students and their families either decided to make a different decision, or they've left the district and left the area completely. We can't tell the difference here from this graph for that, to answering that question that I know one of our committee members asked. The 6-year projection, this is just the raw numbers for it. It's down. This is just showing you it's 500 for next year, another 500, another 400, then a bigger drop, 700, 3 years in a row. That average decline is almost 600 students over the 6-year period. So items to watch: TK expansion over the next 3 years. As the state continues to put money into fully funding transitional kindergarten, it's something that we want to keep an eye on because it's a new option for parents. For those of us that aren't keeping track of this, TK is the first year of a 2-year program, transitional kindergarten being the first, kindergarten being the second. We'll obviously continue to keep an eye on any new developments. This would be housing developments in our attendance area, because that will generate students. And then we also want to track the movement of 6th grades from elementary to middle schools. We'll be completing those, as we all know. And our enrollment in special programs like our language immersion programs, something else we're going to want to try to keep an eye on, see how it's tracking over time. The district is also considering implementing full day kindergarten. And if that happens, that too, along with TK, would be options for parents that we don't currently offer. So perhaps more families see FUSD as an attractive option if full day kinder is one of the programs that we're able to provide. So beyond that, that was the presentation that the demographer made. It was really a summary of the sheets upon sheets that you can really dive into the weeds and see which houses go to which attendance areas and how they are in the feeder pattern and the trends and things like that. As I mentioned earlier, I recently found a couple of items in the demographer's report we will want them to update And one of them is, for instance, the loading factors, how many students per classroom at certain grade levels. We do it a little bit differently than how it's presented in the report. And then the other thing would be the site capacities, I think need to be adjusted as well, because I don't know that the demographer has an updated list of all the current classrooms being used as classrooms. Sometimes we designate those for other purposes, and I'm not sure that the demographer got the updated list. So we'll be working with demographer on that as really a parallel piece to what's happening with the long range facilities plan, because we want to make sure that we have buildings where we need them, and we don't need buildings in certain places. We want to get rid of them if they're something that can be moved, or they're portables, or for instance, maybe they're on a lease agreement. We don't need them anymore. We don't want to pay for a building that we don't need to have. So that's all in the mix right now. We're doing that analysis as we speak. I had a meeting about it today, actually. So it's related to the demographics. So I'll stop because I know that time is a factor, but also you guys may have questions. Since this report's been out for about a month or so, you may have had a chance to look at it and have follow-up questions that I didn't address yet.
Why don't we first start by addressing the questions brought up by Arun in oral communications.
Sure. I remember the first one, or one of them. It had to do with, do we have some sort of essentially an exit survey when families leave as to why they're leaving? We do and we don't. We don't ask it in the way that one of our committee members asked, like when you leave an employer and you may have an exit interview. It's not that formal, but what we do have is some data that would show why a student leaves, for instance, because they're attending another school and we need to know where to send their cumulative file that has all of their records in it. And so oftentimes they'll fill out a form telling us where they're headed. And so we will know for those families. And oftentimes we won't know right away when they leave, but we'll find out later because we'll get a records request from their new district. That could be in the state or out of the state. So our exact procedures around that, I am not as familiar with because I'm new to the district, but I think that between Laura and I, we can check in with our student services department because they're the ones that handle all of our transfers, new enrollments, as well as records requests.
And then thank you. I think you touched upon one of the questions around private school enrollment. What information do we have about surrounding private schools enrollment? Are they increasing or decreasing too?
I don't have any access to information about that other than maybe around the water cooler sorts of comments that I hear from people. I don't have anything definitive, but it is something that we are trying to get visibility into to see where trends are going. I think that by and large, what we're starting to hear, and this doesn't relate to the charter school in Fremont Unified, but as an example, other types of schools are having issues with attendance and enrollment as well, both public and private charters. I read a recent article about that, and I'm hearing from other professionals in the industry that it isn't just public schools that are having some of these challenges. So I don't think we're unique. We're certainly not unique among public schools. And I think with just schools in general, parochial or public, I think they're all having some of those issues. It'll be interesting to see what happens, and we may be able to track it here pretty soon, because if we have an economic downturn, very typical trends are that when there's an economic downturn, families turn to public education, and they might make a different decision and stop paying for something that they could get for, I'll use the word free, but it tends to be less expensive. And so those kinds of decisions families might make if they're in a particular situation. So we'll continue to track that. And in the meantime, try to reach out and find out if we can get exact numbers. I could see, however, that a private school may not be very interested in sharing their exact numbers, but we might be able to have a cordial conversation and understand if they're up or down loosely, if that makes sense.
And I do think we have some indirect numbers we can look at around, are we capturing students year over year and how that compares to other surrounding districts and that sort of thing. They can touch upon some of that as well. So I guess And then the last question, which I'm not sure, Arun, I fully understood, was something about Alameda.
Yeah.
I assume the county is down 3% overall, but FUSD was down 7%.
Yeah. So basically, when I was going through that the demographic report, right? There was a map of all the counties, and Alameda, as such, in the next 3 to 4 years, is supposed to go down by only 3%, the whole county as such. But FUSD is supposed to go down by 7%. So just wanted to see if there was any particular reasoning they while the county FUSD is going down further than what the county average is. In spite of new housing and development which is going to be done.
It doesn't really take into consideration much else other than birth rates. So the county data is birth rate data by district, and so that's all that's really comparing. So you're seeing the effect of it being projected out. So the reality is that there's two factors in a demographer's report that we track, that we update all the time, and one of them is called mobility rate. Basically, how often a home or a residence is changing over, meaning if you have a home where you had a student of school age and then they graduate, they are done with school, does that family stay or does that family leave? And if the family leaves, does another family come in with school age children? That's one factor. That's mobility rate. And the second one is going to be student generation rate. Student generation rate is very simply how many students does that type of residence produce? So as an example, detached homes have a higher generation rate or a lower generation rate than, say, multi-housing, like a condominium complex, for instance. And so we track those over time. It's kind of it's a rate that tells what occurred in the past. And we try to use it to predict the future. It's kind of like the stock market, right? Don't use past results to predict the future, but people do it anyway. We try to do that with student generation rates. So for instance, to your question, when a new housing development is coming online, we look at, well, what kind of housing development is it? Are they single family homes detached, single family homes attached, or are they condominiums or apartments? And so when we figure out, okay, the density then yields a certain student generation rate, and what are we seeing and how is that changing over time as well? Because that changes the loading factors for a certain community who feed to an elementary school and then up from there. So there's multiple layers besides just looking at, oh, there's a housing unit coming in. We have to look at it. And then we also we try to stay very close with any developers, not only because we want to make sure that the district is getting its fair share of the developer fees to make sure that we can put them towards schools, but also we want to know their schedule. We need to know when those housing units are coming online and what part of the year, because we might need to make an initial determination to say, okay, well, we're going to make sure the families know that they're going to this elementary, or if we're opening a new school, which we did recently by the Bringhurst, we might need to tell them, hey, the school's not done yet. We're going to send you here, but thereafter you would go to this other school if you wanted. Those are all general things that we do in the facilities world, school facilities world, to make sure that we're keeping track of what we have, keeping track of where we're headed, and taking into consideration all the local factors that change those variables over time, if that makes sense.
Okay.
And just for reference, I found what you were referring to, Arun. It's in the FAC report on demographics from a few years ago. Okay. We can certainly look at more detail at that, but that it's a good follow-up question. But just so everybody on the committee and Mr. Tillman, you're aware that that's where that's come from, so we can review that to make sure that that's accurate. Other questions or comments? Diane Jones.
Yeah, just going back to this topic and this question, I'm wanting to learn more, because I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to, Arun, because I know there's different things that are tracked with demographic reports. Some are like overall declines in population, and then there are declines in the student population. So I'm wondering, because at least in the last couple of years, our student declines have been less than the county average. So I'm not sure if what we're seeing is a decline in the general population that is lower than the decline in student population, which would go to declining birth rates. So I think what we're seeing is maybe people moving out of the Bay Area in general. So we're just seeing declines in population, but we're also seeing the people that are moving out are the ones that have young children. And the declining birth rate compounds that. So we're seeing declines in the California population that are most significant in school-age children. So if we're comparing like a decline in student enrollment with the decline in general population, it will look like we're declining more than the county average, when really, like, last school year, our decline was, even though it was very significant and more than we expected, it was less than what other districts saw.
So probably the smartest thing to do at this point, and Mr. Hillman, you can agree or not agree to, but I can share with you the reference, and you can ask our demographer, because the demographer may have the information already that is more correct or more up to date than the reference from this FAC report from a few years ago. I definitely agree. We always want to make sure we're working with the best data, though. So I like the question. Just making a note about that.
And in that, probably I was looking at an old report, because in that also it said that Newark, actually the enrollment is slowly increasing. I don't know.
Yeah, well, we'll take a deeper look.
Yeah, just Newark declined enough to where I think they closed 2 or 3 schools already. So
okay.
They're definitely declining. So if you're seeing a report that has them increasing, it's definitely outdated.
But speaking of school size, that was one of the topics I wanted to share some thoughts on. And I think it's an important way to look at another important angle to look at this demographics report, and is like, what are our school sizes? And the board has adopted target school sizes, and I think we're seeing, as we're declining in enrollment, that we are going to have today we have 7 schools that are smaller than the board policy on the smallest target school size at the elementary level, which was 450. By 28, 29, this demographic report suggests that'll double to 14. And so I think that is independent of the number of classrooms, the utilization rate. That is like, programmatically, what do we think is a good school size? Is there too small of a school size? Is there too big of a school size? And I think that's an important consideration, I think, as we're looking at the long-range facilities master plan. And in fact, if you look at the FAC rubric that we adopted a few years ago, that was one of the measures that we adopted, was how close are we to hitting our target school size. And in part, I bring this up, I definitely encourage you to look at the documents that we have posted on the FAQ if you haven't reviewed them recently, because many of you are newer to FAC before some of these things were, or after some of these things were released. Diane.
Yeah, I think that this is a great question, Brian, and it's something that I've been losing sleep over, honestly, because when schools I mean, you think a small school is great, and it is to a point, but there comes a time when you don't have a large enough population to have a functioning, say, PTA, where you don't have enough students where there are enough to have, say, a sports team or a drama program, because you just don't have enough students at a site. Also, the way we allocate prep specialists is dependent on the number of students. And so as schools drop below a certain point, they could lose prep specialists. That's not to mention the fact, economically speaking, you know, not just class sizes, but how many admins do you want per student? Does it make sense for us to be paying for a principal and all the utilities at say 2 schools that are at 200 students? Or does it make sense to have one school of 400 students where you have an admin and you're paying the utilities at one site? And I know this is scary for us to think about closing school sites, and nobody wants to do that because it's so disruptive. And then if we get rid of school sites, then what do we do if we hit an increasing enrollment period? We learned years ago what that looked like. We don't want to put ourselves in that situation, but we have some really challenging things ahead of us as we look at what we're going to do as we decline at some of these sites that fall below thresholds that make sense for services and programs. I don't have answers, but I think the sooner we start talking about this, the better, because we want to be able to ease into changes that we have to make and not have us hit a wall and have to make really disruptive changes that feel like they come out of the blue for people.
I think I'll just build on that briefly. You know, in addition to looking at the facilities plan from the standpoint of the schools losing enrollment, so perhaps we don't need to build, you know, bigger facility XYZ there. We also need to look at, you know, how we meet these target school sizes to have the best program, and that may, you know, nobody's favorite topic, but that may mean looking at the boundaries in the district. And the benefits, obviously it's always a hard discussion, but the benefits of doing that are great for the students. They're great fiscally because we're better leveraging every facility we've got. And so that is part of some of the questions I have that I want us to be looking at this long range facilities plan update. Are there any other questions or comments on this item?
Yeah. So with respect to I was looking at it's the 2020 the rubric, right? And for middle schools, it says its minimum is 600, and we want to keep the maximum as 1,800. That was what is recommended. But already Taunton, if you can see the program, so it's the program capacity, and the size which is projected is going to be 2,000. Right. So we know Taunton is most likely next year might go up. Is there anything which we need to address, or?
First off, thank you for reading through all that stuff. It's great to have another mind looking at it. This rubric was something that was adopted and shared with the board years ago, but was never acted upon. And actually, I think in part waiting for this long range facilities plan effort to get underway. And so these are all exactly the kind of difficult discussions we need to have. And we need to look at this again and decide if this is still an approach that FAC stands behind, or do we want to modify it, or are we going to do something very, very different? And that's the work the subcommittee some of the work the subcommittee will start with is like collecting what we've done before with staff input to a few different proposals to bring back to FAC.
it's a very nuanced question, and the opportunity to discuss it more in the future, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Okay, thank you.
We'll move on to the next item, which is staff update. And I just wanted to clarify on the agenda in case it wasn't clear. The items listed on the agenda, I think were contributed by me and are just items I know about that I think are good updates, but does not preclude us from hearing other important updates from staff.
Okay, I'll start and try to keep it short given the time on the clock. The item here for Patterson Ranch surplus property, the board took action at the last meeting to declare the Patterson Ranch property as surplus, which starts a process going similar with some slight differences, but with similar to the surplus action that the board took in December for Marshall School. So Patterson Ranch is different because it's never been a school. It was a blank piece of blank piece of land that was given to the district, and so it was looked at and given all the other conversations we've already had tonight and you've been hearing about with declining enrollment and such, the board decided to act and declare this surplus property, which means it starts the process for an RFP for the district to receive basically proposals to purchase the property. So there'll be more about this at the board meeting level because everything has to be done kind of out in the open and accepting bids and such in a timeline. That's still being developed right now. So I don't have much more on that other than the resolution that the board adopted. And then for middle school updates, we've got the 3 conversion projects that are still progressing. We have at Hopkins Middle School, I'll start there. We have the new multi-purpose room, multi-use room is essentially done and has been turned over to the school. They're already using it. They've been using it for some time. And the 2-story new construction that will house, I think it's something like 10 new classrooms, is on track to be done by the end of this school year, by the beginning of summer. And things are going pretty well there. I would say that Centerville is also going well and is on schedule to turn over the new admin building's first floor to the site for use during spring break. So we'll have new furniture arrive and students move into that building, the first floor only. The final part of that building is a second stairwell that's a stairwell to the second story that has to be built. And the landing spot for that is in an existing old building that has to be torn down. So the students that are in the old building will move into the new building, first floor, during spring break. We'll tear down the old building, and then the plaza, the courtyard, and the second stairwell will all be put in over the summer. And that'll probably go in that courtyard work a little bit to the month of August. But it won't stop the transition from starting the 6th graders coming up to Centerville, and it won't stop them from starting the school year all at the beginning of the year like normal. And then there's the new drop-off area that's adjacent to the new admin building. That'll be also last and done over the summer. At Thornton Junior High, soon to be Thornton Middle School, we have the admin building and library building up front. It is on track to finish in the summertime. What's nice about Thornton is that there has been some delays in the project, most recently from the inclement weather we had in the beginning of January. But the site itself, with the portables that it currently has, can really handle more students than will be there. And so RGM Kramer, the firm that I introduced at the beginning, is working with the site principal there and the construction manager, Sixth Dimension, to go over contingency plans about what happens if the admin library building's not done by the start of school. So we have a backup plan. But at this point, we're not seeing anything that would prevent the school from opening with 6th graders there. So we're moving forward with that process. And we still have a couple of levers that we can pull to make sure that things do finish on time. And as I mentioned, we also have some additional capacity there that we're not taking away. We're not taking those portables away this summer. They're going to stay there for a little while longer, which allows for the students to have a place to go, the office staff a place to go, in case we find something that slows us down that we are not expecting between now and the end of the school year. So those are the three big projects, the three big middle school projects. We also have Kennedy. Kennedy has their kickoff last week, and moving forward with the next phase there, I believe over spring break, Kennedy will get their interim housing. I think it's like 6 to 8 portables, maybe 12. And the process at Kennedy is essentially the contractor is going to do one wing or one building at a time, move those students and teachers over to the temporary portables, work on that portion of the campus. When it's done, move the kids back in and teachers and staff back in, and then move the next set over into the portables and work on the second set. And we're going to do that about 3 or 4 times. And that project will probably timeline wise go through the summer of 2024. They'll start right away. So some movement and some loud noises and progress will be seen on the Kennedy campus here pretty soon. So those are the big 4 projects that we have in construction right now.
Jennifer.
Yeah, just a quick question. Is the Kennedy project, is that primarily HVAC?
The scope on Kennedy is primarily HVAC. We're abandoning the old central plant chiller and heating system and going with what they call package units, which are standalone HVAC heater systems on one for every single classroom. That work also involves redoing the interior ceiling grid and lighting. And there's going to also be, the current scope is to patch back the roof where we put the HVAC unit on. But we know that Kennedy is one of the schools that has a roof that needs really a full replacement or a full seal, not just patching. So we're preparing that cost estimate right now to take to the board for their consideration. We're hoping to do that in the month of February, so that when we walk away from, a building at Kennedy, it's got a whole new roof that'll last the next, 15 to 20 to 25 years. There's also some improvements to the restrooms. It's really fixtures. There's some path of travel items at that campus. There's some striping of the parking lot. There's new lighting. There's separately, they're already doing this now, the speaker system and PA system on the campus is being upgraded by our IT department, as well as full wireless connectivity for every classroom with a wireless access point being installed in every room. That's a separate from the contractor doing the roof work and HVAC work, but it's happening concurrently right now. So if you were to walk into Kennedy, you're going to start seeing all of that happening here pretty soon.
Oh, great. Thank you so much.
Allison.
Yeah, just a quick question about that surplus property. I was just curious because I know other communities have done this. Look, whether anybody had been looking at reaching out to developers or building staff housing on the surplus district property. We're losing a lot of teachers and other staff to places where people can afford to live right now, and so it's just something that's been done in other districts. And I wondered if anybody had sort of looked at that as an option.
I can tell you that is definitely a topic that has been looked into, and I've done a bunch of research on it in my previous district as well. For the Patterson Ranch property, it's not really the right property for that. It has a pretty large easement that goes through the middle of it, and it was actually donated to the district, the city of Fremont, and East Bay Regional Park kind of in 3 slices. And so there was a conversation early on if it was going to be a school site about swapping the slices potentially to get a better one for a school and turn the other one into a park. So it's not really the right site for that, but it doesn't mean that topic doesn't have any legs. It would need its own funding source, and that gets a little complicated. But it's still, I think, something that it's worth looking into. And I believe that while I don't have direct direction from the board to look into it, if an opportunity arose, I think they'd want to hear about it. So.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
and I know I can't remember exactly what, but in the last few years, a study was brought to the board on that topic. So,
Yeah, the,
So-
the last I was aware via FUDTA, we offered 20 subsidized units to educators, and then they were never reoffered. It was mid-year, mid-lease for a lot of people, and the ones that didn't get accepted were not reoffered. So it was not a large effort at the time. It would be interesting to see what happens.
I was referring to a report brought to the board about how to implement building housing for staff and what that would all entail, and what are some approaches to that. There was definitely I don't remember the details because it was actually might have been pre-pandemic. I don't know, but it was there is some information out there.
Okay, that'd be awesome. Thank you.
Diane Jones.
Yeah, sorry, I had to switch to my phone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, this was just as I was getting onto the board, there were discussions about this, and the challenge at the time, just so you know, was that in order to offer workforce housing and have it be designated as affordable, that can only be done when there are certain thresholds met with income. And as horrible as it is, our teachers make more than what would qualify for them for affordable housing.
Even though we make less than rent. Yeah, I know, you know.
And it's probably set by the state. So in some places in the state that probably makes sense, but it doesn't here.
When you pay $3,000 a month for a 1-bedroom, yeah.
Right. So this is something that I've talked to legislators about, but it didn't seem like something that we could solve locally to where we could actually build housing that our staff would qualify to be able to utilize. I don't know if that's something you run into, Mr. Hillman.
Yes, that's definitely a factor.
I wonder, is it, this is a whole separate discussion, but if you look at just like SEIU, for example, a lot of our custodians live really, really, really far away. Even if you leave out teachers, is this something that we might look into for other staff members?
I think if that's the committee would like to have that conversation, we should agendize it and give staff time to bring forward more information. At this point, I don't have anything at my fingertips that I can really answer in a coherent way that's going to satisfy the committee, I think. Sorry.
Well, then let's move along to our next item is subcommittee reports. We have no subcommittee reports this evening. Our item after that is thoughts on future meeting topics. The majority of our time will be spent on the long-range facilities plan, I predict, over the next several meetings. But are there any other future meeting topics members would like to propose? Okay. Moving on then, I'll move to review meeting dates. Our next meeting is March 1st, 2023, in person, 7:30 at a middle school to be determined. Or if for some reason we can't book a middle school, we would be doing it at the district office. With that, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everybody. Happy New Year.
Thanks, Brian.